Masterful narratives, rich multiculturalism, language, identity, and so much more that South Asian literature offers us. Today, my guest is Dr. Anna Guttman, Chair of the Department of English, Lakehead University, and she's here to talk to us about her work and her insights on South Asian literature. Welcome, Anna, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me, Rupa.
Oh, you're welcome. And South Asian literature, what does it represent?
That's a really big question. South Asian literature is such a large field because it really encompasses literature from all over the subcontinent, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, going back thousands of years.
Sure.
So it really represents much more than one thing. I mean, from the earliest Sanskritic texts all the way up to, contemporary Booker Prize winning writers like Salman Rushdie. It really is a very rich and diverse field.
Mm-hmm. And I'm so proud to say, and he's from my hometown, Rabindranath Tagore, who was I think he's the only South Asian Nobel laureate in literature. And he got it for his poetry, Gitanjali, for his work in poetry.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So far, he's the only winner from South Asia, although I wouldn't necessarily assume he'll be the last one.
I'm sure. We look forward to more. Yeah, there have been a few from Japan winning literature awards. So what drew you to South Asian literature?
I get that question a lot.
Often, yes.
It was a bit of a long and winding journey for me. I did my own education as an undergraduate and graduate student back in the 1990s. And when I was studying, a lot of my education was really influenced by the discussions that were going on at that time around issues like multiculturalism in Canada and the United States, and the different approaches that Canada had versus the US, the idea of the melting pot, for example, versus the idea of, say, the mosaic, for thinking about what it meant to live in a diverse country with people of many different cultures and backgrounds. And as I was sort of struggling with those questions for myself, I began to feel like just comparing Canada to the US, as we so often do in Canada, was really very limiting. And I became quite interested in the ways in which other countries also thought about their own diversity. And that was what began to draw me to India, because of course India is so diverse religiously, ethnically, in terms of language.
Diverse cultural mosaic.
Culturally. And that diversity has also really been a prominent theme in the 20th century and 21st century history of India, and in its literature, in its politics. And so that really sort of set me on a journey in my own graduate work to explore that diversity.
Challenges. I'm sure this question has come up to you too. As a non-South Asian, what were the challenges that you came across, especially, in terms of relating to context or everyday Asian life, nuances of everyday Asian life?
There are certainly challenges, and sometimes when my students see me at the front of the room, they are surprised to see a white woman teaching them South Asian literature. And it's something that I always discuss quite openly, what it means to study literature and what it means for someone like me to study and to teach in the field. And I think there are a lot of different ways of thinking about that question. I mean, one, of course, is that hopefully we all read in order to expand our horizons, right? And to encounter other cultures. And many of the students that I encounter are interested in broadening their own horizons. It's also the case that even when we read literature from our own cultures, we always have a complicated relationship with it. I can't stand in, I'm a Jewish woman here in Thunder Bay, but I really can't stand in for all women or all Jews or all Jewish women. And I always invite my students to think about the fact that even when we relate to others from our own backgrounds, that's always a complicated relationship, right? It's never simplistic. And so that's always a good starting point, I think, for reading books and even thinking about what it means to relate to other people. That said, I've been working in the field now for more than a decade, so it's been an opportunity for me to get comfortable in it and to establish my own interests and practices.
Are there any recurring themes, or are there any themes that emerge more than the other in South Asian literature?
It's another really big question. There certainly are themes. I mean, unsurprisingly, There are many historical events from the 20th century that are very much alive in the consciousness of contemporary writers. Partition is always an important theme.
So many colonial stories, yeah.
Absolutely. The history of nationalism in India and Pakistan and Bangladesh is always a major part of that literature. But there's also, a huge diversity of themes that, I really wouldn't want to oversimplify. Many contemporary writers are deeply interested in globalization and the changing place of countries like India in an increasingly globalized world.
And when you say contemporary, do you have a time span that you're talking about, 15 years, 20 years?
I would say, globalization has become a more prominent theme in perhaps the last 25 years around.
So you're talking about that kind of, yeah. What was your first reading in terms of South Asian literature, fiction or nonfiction?
I'm struggling to remember what the very first book was because there have been so many books that have been important to me over the years.
What drew you? Yeah, let's say, what fascinated you? What was the first early reading?
Yeah, certainly one of the books that I really loved and really captivated me when I was a student was Vikram Seth's long novel, A Suitable Boy, which despite being very long, nearly 1,500 pages long, I read it all in about 2 days. I couldn't stop reading it. Yes. I just enjoyed his work so much. I was drawn in by his writing and also by its combination of themes. As the title suggests, A Suitable Boy is in some ways a marriage book where the main character Lata has to choose between a number of different possible suitors, and so it's enjoyable to figure out who she will marry, but it's also woven together with so many other interesting questions around everything from Indian nationalism to traditional Indian music that I think really makes it a very dynamic reading experience.
And they're not predominantly vernacular. You have a lot of English literature in South Asian literature, right?
Absolutely. Certainly, the majority of South Asian literature is in diverse vernacular languages. But there is a really significant and large body of literature in English as well. Given the history of India and the history of British colonialism, people have been writing in South Asia in English, going back really to the early 19th century and even earlier. And even though it perhaps isn't the majority of the population which today reads English literature, the population is so large that it is still a really significant body of people. My students often ask me about this, and I suggest that even in India alone, if just 5% of individuals in India with its population of more than 1 billion are interested in reading English literature, that's more than the entire population of Canada. That's more than the population of Britain. So that's still a population that's really creating a really significant body of literature and consuming that significant literature.
But it's good because there are authors like Meera Nair, Chetan Bhagat. They've brought our country, or they brought the South Asian literature across borders and to a wider audience. Hold on to that reflective thought, and we will take a very short break. Dear viewers, stay tuned because there's so much more to know about South Asian literature.